All right, welcome back.
Welcome back alongside Pirate Geek Girl.
Well,
I am...
Since I'm going to keep going with that our Redis connection,
So, where did we leave off? With R and pirates. No, we left off looking to stored data inside of our data store. And so let's go ahead and now roll into how we're going to do that and close out the building of our little trivia application.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to go back into our code and actually add the code to actually start saving values to the database.
I'm very interested to watch you type.
With one eye.
Yeah. No, one eye tied behind
one
a
eye patch works well. Two eye patches, not so well. One eye patch looking pretty cool. Two eye patches, one too far.
Not looking.
Yeah, exactly. So after we've installed Redis, which is what we did in the last module, now we need to figure out how we're actually going to use it. So, and forgive me, I'm going to lose the eye patch because otherwise I can spend the rest of the day with a red band across my forehead.
There's actually still a little bit of
I'm sure I'm going to have a little line for the rest of the module. I can live with that. So we've already talked about sort of how to get started with Redis, how to connect to the actual Redis data store itself. That we have already covered. Mm-hmm. And that we did with the strict Redis method. And by specifying, most important there was specifying the server name. And we specified the local host because we have installed the Redis software locally. And there is our connection called,
Yep.
Christopher, the name of our connection is?
R.
Correct. Thank you. So now what we want to do is we want to start storing some keys and values in that, using that connection. So, of course, then the question comes, there has to be some sort of command we can use to say we want to store a value. Well, in Redis, and when we're calling Redis from Python, there's a method called set that we use. You just specify a name for the key and the value you want to store. So
that seems pretty straightforward.
It is pretty straightforward. So basically in this case, go back up there. So if you take a look at this, I call my method, my set method. Mm-hmm. I specify my connection name, which is?
R.
Thank you. And I specify that the name of my key is going to be first name, and that gets stored here. Or that's the name of my key, and then I specify the value Bill to be stored for that particular key. So that's basically going to store this value for me in Redis. And when I want the value back, I can do that by using the get method. So I use set to store a value, and I use get to ask for the value back. So when I call the get method, I'm going to need a variable to hold the value that comes back. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see I specify the name of the key, first name, and it says, oh, well, the value for first name is Bill, and then it takes that value Bill and puts it into my variable.
That's perfect. So just like we did request form, and that stored that into the variable, same concept, you're just going to say rget, and then that's going to wind up inside of retrieved name.
Exactly, except I'm just getting it from Redis instead of requesting it from a form on the browser.
Perfect.
You can store numbers as well as strings. So absolutely, you want to do something like keep track of number of visitors at the website. You can store as 0. It's just by the data type you pass in, whether it figures out you're passing in a string or a number, that'll determine the data type it stores. One of the neat things is if you do store a number, there are some extra methods that you can use to increment and decrement the stored value.
Add 1 or subtract 1.
Yeah. So if I call increment, it will literally add 1 to number of visitors, so from 0 to 1. You can also say increment by, so you can say add 5, add 2, add 6, whatever the number is you need to increase it by. There is also a decrement, number of visitors by 1. However, for whatever reason, there's no decrement by. Don't know why, it's just one of those odd little things. So there is a decrement function, there's an increment function, there's an increment by, but there's no decrement by yet. Maybe somebody will add it in the next version.
On it.
All right, yeah, if you don't mind, if you just code that over.
I'll get on that. Yeah, you
awesome.
Keep doing your thing. I'm going to start coding over.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, Christopher, what do you think is going to happen if you try to set a key, and that key already exists inside Redis?
Well, I've seen the slide, so I know the answer. But what I would say is, without giving away the answer, when I looked at that, when I look at that, I might think, hey, wait a minute, if the key's already there, it might throw an error, because it might go, hey, wait a minute, you told me that the key value was supposed to be this. Now you're telling me a new value. I don't know what to do with this, and it would throw an error. There would seem to be at least a possibility here, but I do know what the right answer is.
Yeah, in this case, by default, it's simply going to overwrite. So if I say, because the thing is, when I do an r.set, I'm actually creating the key. And giving it a value. So when I call the set function a second time with the same key name, it might say, hey, that function already, or that key already exists. But in this case, absolutely, it's simply going to overwrite the existing key with the new value. And this might be the way you want it to work, or it might not be the way you want it to work. Just depends on the way your brain works. If you're thinking, no, wait, I didn't want to overwrite what was already there. I wanted to if it's already there, then I want to append this value to what's already there. Or I want to get an error message back because that value shouldn't already exist. So there are absolutely ways that with code, there's always a way. The only question is how hard is it going to be to check. So there is an exists function that allows you to see, does that key already exist? So I can say, hey, if exists first name returns a true. So if it doesn't exist, well, then let's create it.
So if you wanted to add in that functionality of it throwing an error, if it was already there and you tried to change the value, you could do that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
You just write your own logic.
Just write your own logic.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
If you now, this is one of those. Hang on, maybe this is my aside moment. Okay, but I'm going to throw my. Oh, is that the wrong side?
Yeah. So it's supposed to. Well, I do it to the right.
You do the left. I'm going to do it to the left. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then Christopher's off. I like the fact that Christopher's marked as off tangent. One of the things when I started exploring and first working with Redis, there are some options you can specify when you call the set method, ex and nx and so on. And some of these options say, hey, if you specify this option, it's going to throw an error if the key already exists. The world of open source code. They don't seem to work in the Python when I'm using them. So I found it more reliable to do the check to see if they exist separately rather than relying on the ex and nx parameters. But if you read the documentation for the set method, you'll see the ex, nx parameters. You can try them, but I've never managed to convince them to work from Python. So I find it easier to just test the exists myself. So done with my aside.
Yeah, and I would also say, here, I'll go ahead and I'll do this as well, just to continue the tangent. But I would also say that, again, there's multiple ways to write the exact same block of code, and you really do want to prize readability. And so I personally like having that extra step, because again, if somebody's never used that Redis API, they go in and they take a look at that, they're not going to go know what
they're not going to have the ex parameter true means if it already exists, give me an error.
Exactly. But if they see explicitly exists, then they're going to know what that is without having to know what those
absolutely true. So this is it's that sort of, we call it sometimes sort of self-documented code or more readable code.
Exactly. Yep.
This is more intuitive to somebody reading it for the first time.
Exactly.
Now, if the key does already exist and you maybe want to append to the value that's already there instead of overwriting it, so maybe people are entering a name and then another name and another name, so maybe your key is called list of names.
Right.
And you just want to keep adding more names to the existing list, but when you get the first name, you want to create it. You can check if it exists using exist function. There is also an append function that you can call, which will append a value rather than overwriting it.
And that way you really kind of get complete control over what you want to do with that value if it's already there.
Exactly. So lots of options there. If you do want to actually delete a key, go figure, delete.
No, I'm sorry, you lost me. Can you do that again?
I know, it's tough. It's probably because I forgot to do the r.delete when I started. So the delete function will allow you to remove one. So let's go to back to our trivia application.
Yes.
And let's see if we can add code. You'd left me a few to-do items, I seem to remember, inside that application.
Yeah, get to work over there.
All right, let's see what I can do. So
I'm just going to, grab my phone. I'm just going to
hang out over there?
Get some work done.
Oh, all right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so going for high scores in Wordament, no doubt. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to go down. If you remember, we had some code down here. We'd sent the user the form, and then the user had created a question.
Yep.
So they typed in a value. When they submitted the form, it came back. It was posted back to us.
That's
they hit
correct.
The submit button.
Yep.
And then we were reading the title, and we were asking from the form to get the value of the title they typed in, the question they typed in, and the answer they typed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it in the data store. Now, the variable name I'm going to use, or the key name, just so we can keep this straight. The key name will be whatever title they typed in, then colon question, sort of thing. So if you think of it this way, let's say they enter a category, it might be music question, or it might be countries. Can't type apparently. Countries question. And for answers, I'm going to store it with a name something like music answer or countries. Again, cannot type. Countries answer. So that's sort of the syntax. Though I'm going to be, things are case sensitive, so I'm just going to make everything lowercase to save myself problems later. I'm always treating everything case sensitive, right? Best practices. Music.
So Redis, the keys are case sensitive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are the names I'm going to give to my keys. It'll be like music question or countries question or music answer and countries answer. And then the value will be whatever the user has typed in as a question and an answer.
Okay.
So I've already created my connection up here. But you'll notice where I had created the connection, I'm going to actually zoom out on my code a little bit so you can sort of see this. I want to point out that this is a function, correct, Christopher? So I have a question for you. If I declare a variable inside a function, where can I use that connection?
Inside that function.
Can I use it anywhere else, like in a function down here?
No.
Right.
Only inside that function because it winds up setting what's known as scope.
Right. So when I declare the variable inside my hello method for my routing, I can only use it there.
Correct.
So I either have to redeclare that connection for every single function, which is a little clunky.
It is.
Or I can just take that line of code and move it out of the functions. So have it up here with the rest of my code, not inside the function. Actually, I'll move it up one more line here so it's above that. And I'm just going to move that comment up as well. You know what I just did? I just did the cut and paste blank line.
Oh, don't forget to put your font back to a regular size so we can see.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We'll do that too. There we go. Move in so you can see a bit better.
There we go.
All I'm doing here is I'm moving my Redis connection outside of the function, so above the first function. That way, all of the functions in this module will be able to use that code.
Okay.
So now I have a connection. The connection's called R. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my code. And where you said, Susan, please add code here to store the data in the data store.
Add code there. Yep.
I'm going to say r.set. And the key name is going to be whatever title the user passed into me. And then a colon. And then the word question. Because this is where I'm going to store the question. With a silent R, absolutely. And then the value I want to store inside that key is the actual question that the user suggested we should ask.
Okay.
Then I'm going to need to store the answer for that question. So again, I'm just going to use the title that they typed in, which is a category, following my naming convention. Answer.
Now, does it have to be a colon?
It doesn't have to be a colon. That's just a convention. If you want to make it /answer, .answer, or you want to start getting fancy doing title case or something like that.
Right.
Any of those will work, but it's a fairly common convention in Redis. You'll see the colon used a lot. So it's one of those ones, if you start using it, then when you look at someone else's code, you're more likely to see stuff that looks familiar to you.
I gotcha.
But no, not required. And I want to store the answer that the user typed in, because remember, a little higher up in the code, we'd been reading from the HTML form that question that they typed in and that answer, and we'd stored those in variables. So I'm just accessing those variables here and storing them in Redis.
Yep.
So this will store the values. Let's run and see if that actually works. See if my code works. And then we'll worry about retrieving them.
Sure.
Okay, so let's execute our code. Yes, I would need to rebuild it. We see the web page coming up, and we go and we decide to create a new question. And because that's, of course, where my code is written. So I'm going to write a trivia question on Canada, of course. Let's see. What is our national sport? And the answer?
Curling?
Lacrosse.
Ah.
Actual little bit of Canadian trivia for you. Most people think it's hockey. It's, in fact, the sport of lacrosse. So I submit that question. And we should be taken to the page that says, oh, thank you for entering a question. What is our national sport?
Now, one thing that's worth highlighting here is it went to that page, so it connected, did its whole thing, and didn't have an error. Now, we could have, if we wanted to, added in the try block and rerouted to an error page if it would have failed and things like that. And again, it's one of those things where we're trying to just kind of walk through demos and focus in on the mainline code. So that's why we're not incorporating things like that.
Yeah,
could we? Absolutely. But again, we're trying to keep it as straightforward as possible.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it fairly simple for now.
Yep.
That we understand all the basic principles. Now, one of the things we haven't done, though, is that what is our national sport? That was already done in the HTML. That isn't using Redis. That's not reading the question back from Redis.
Correct.
So how do I know those values actually got stored? Well, I could start writing code to try and retrieve the values, but then you run into the problem of you don't know if it doesn't work, was the mistake in the code that wrote the values or the mistake in the code that was reading the values? So one of the things that's useful to do is you can actually, when you install Redis on your computer, you get a tool installed on your computer called Redis Client. So if we go back to my computer for a second here, if I bring up Windows and I type in Redis, you can see there's actually another piece of software. When you install Redis, you get this included called Redis Client. Mm-hmm. And when I'm on Redis Client,
might want to change your color real quick.
I'll try to change the values here so it's a little easier to see. Yes. Change the text to black and the background to white. There we Nope. Oh, we're good.
All right.
Okay, we're in.
We're good.
All right, so you can see what we're not sure about. I've never tried to change the Redis client background before. Okay, now what I can do is those get and set commands, I can use those right here in the Redis client. So if I can remember the name of my key, and now I'm just going to go.
Canada, capital C.
It was capital C, Canada, and then the name of the question. Then you can see it returns what is our national sport. So I can see that, and I'm doing this in Redis. I'm basically going to the Redis database and saying, hey, tell me, what's the value for the key Canada question?
Nice.
What's the value for Canada answer? So I can see that, indeed, these values are stored. You don't have to be in Python to retrieve the values. Remember, this is separate software. So I can see that they're in there. And, if I want to, I could even try adding another trivia question in here. Let's try setting a value into it.
Make it happen.
So let's create one called Redis is going to be my category.
Okay.
And the question is going to be, can you store a new question here? All right. And since it said OK, no error messages back, then I'm going to assume that Redis answer is yes.
Okay.
All right, so now I've tried using set commands. So theoretically later, when I add the code to retrieve questions, I should be able to retrieve that question on my website.
Seems to make sense to me.
Okay. So now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. And I've done. Now we're going to go down here, and we're going to go to where it said we had the code here where we were bringing up the page, and somebody specifies, I would like to see.
Yep.
And when they ask for a question, they specify the title of the question they want.
Perfect.
So, or of a category, if you will.
Don't forget to stop your debugging.
Oh, yeah, I'm still running my code. Thank you.
Yep. I do that all the time.
Yes. So when we go to that page and they do a get, we obviously have to display to them the question to display. Mm-hmm. So I need to read that question from the data store. And I see a little note here from Christopher coming up.
Some code there. I'm back to my phone.
All right.
All right.
And in this case, I need to use a get to retrieve the value. And the value I want to retrieve is going to be the key name. And the key name is going to be whatever title they typed in, because that's going to be part of the key name. And then we add that colon question. And that's going to string. Now we need a variable to hold that value. Question equals. So basically I'm going to replace where Christopher had question is hard-coded question here. I'm going to say question is equal to whatever is returned from Redis when we ask it to get the value with the key of title typed in, so Canada, Redis, whatever question title they entered, colon question. And that value is now going to go into that question variable. Okay?
Hey, triple word score.
All right, well done. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. And again, we're going to need, once they've seen the question and they've typed in an answer, then they're going to post back the form to us.
Yep.
And they're going to give us back an answer. We're going to need to check if that answer they gave us matches the stored answer. So instead of assuming the answer is answer, we're going to say if the answer, that the actual answer is equal to, we're going to have to go get that value from Redis. So we get title answer. And that's going to give me back the answer to the question we just prompted them. And then we have our logic that says, hey, if the submitted answer matches that answer, then display the page that says you got it right. And otherwise, display the page that said, sorry, you got it wrong, and make sure you tell them the answer they suggested and the correct answer.
Yep.
Okay, so moment of truth. Let's try it out.
And while Susan's bringing this up, one thing that's worth highlighting is the way that we built this. It was already all set, ready to go for that code that Susan threw into there. So we threw in kind of the hard-coded values. Let's go in and test it, and then let's go in now and actually start adding on the database code. And you know, this works out well in development because it allows you to kind of segment out where your potential problems are. Because what we tested originally was the fact that all of our little Python and Flask code worked out just fine, which was, you know, really, really good. And now we're adding on the database part, and then we can see, well, wait a minute, it worked just fine without the database code. Now we add in the database code, something's going wrong. Now we know where the problem is, or vice versa. That if we ran into problems just trying to do it without the database, now we know exactly where that problem is. And I'm not saying Susan's going to have problems here. I'm just saying it allows us to better identify where that problem came from.
And I agree 100%, Christopher, because you and I both know that as soon as you're trying to create code that connects to something somewhere else, to some other application,
yep,
that is often where things go wrong.
Exactly.
So it is often the line of code that tries to connect to a database or tries to write to a database or to read from a database. Those are frequently lines of code that take a little fiddling with to get them working.
Yes.
So that is often where I have problems when I am writing code.
Yep.
Hopefully not this time, but it has certainly been known to happen to me before.
Exactly.
So what I've done now on the screen is I'm creating a new question in our trivia and the title is Python. And the question is, how do you spell Python? And the answer is Python.
Python.
Right.
Ooh, okay.
So I'm going to submit that question. And it says, OK, stored my question. Now, if I want to be asked that question, we haven't created hyperlinks on the page to take us to that page. But if we went back to the routing, I believe it was called...
question, whack, and then title.
That's right. You type in question, and then you type in the title. So I called it Python.
Yep.
And that will bring up the question, which has that key value of Python. And I go up, and it says, now this is weird. We're going to come to this in just a second. This is weird.
Okay.
B : how do you spell Python? I'm not sure where that B thing's coming from. And then I type in the correct answer of Python, and it's going to come back and go, ooh. Oh, I think we found a mistake somewhere in our code. Now, this may be related to that whole B- thing. So it's not working yet. And
Yeah.
you did see that B popping up on the screen there, which is a little strange.
Yeah, letter B. There must be an answer.
Yeah,
letter B.
But if you take a look, if we actually go, this is where having that Redis client is really handy, because I can sort of go double check and go, well, did it store the values correctly? So let's go check, and let's see if Python question is stored in our Redis data store. Yeah, and there's no little B- thing in front of it. And if I say get Python answer, I can see it is actually equal to Python. So, okay, I'm looking at that going, all right, that looks all right to me. What's happening? Turns out, if you go digging through some Python documentation and Redis documentation, you'll discover that Redis actually stores the key values as bytes, not as a string. So when we do a get in Python and we say, hey, give me back that value, it returns it as a string as bytes. And that's why you're seeing the little B' appearing at the beginning of the string. So what we have to do is we have to tell Python, there's two ways of doing this. We can either, as we do each get and set, we can say turn it into a string and read it back as a string. Or we can actually, since everything we're working with in this particular application is all strings, the other option is we can actually specify that on the connection level, just encode and decode everything for us, treat everything as strings. So that's what I'm going to change. So we get rid of that B', and that way when we're doing our gets, we're getting a string back. And that's going to help a lot of our code. So let's go back to our Visual Studio. And all I need to do is change that one connection string. There we go up here. And I'm going to add 2 extra parameters here. I'm going to specify that the character set I'm using is UTF. That's when you're changing from bytes to strings. It has to know which set of rules to use for the conversion, and I'm specifying UTF-8, which just means I'm using 8 bits to represent a character. Don't worry about that too much. And then I've got the decode. So I'm going to specify when I do this, please decode my responses when they come back. I would like to do that automatically. True. All right, once I've done that, now what I'm going to do is I am going to stop debugging, and I'm going to create a brand new question. And this time, when I go create my new question, this is working, is what I call it. Does this work? And I'm hoping the answer will be yes.
And the answer is going to be no.
Okay, and you're going to tell me why in a second?
No.
All right, well, we'll go this far. We'll see where it goes. So we're going to change this to submit question. And we ask, does this work? And then we're going to go, so we've hopefully got that question stored in Redis now. And then we go to question, and we want to bring up the question / working. And this is where it's funny, I typed it in 30 seconds ago, and I'm thinking that's what I typed into the value. And there, sure enough, it brings up the question, does this work? But you can see that B apostrophe has been removed. So I've successfully returned a string now, which will be a little bit nice. Now, this is where I can see Christopher, the smoke coming out of his ears as we're trying to live figure out why we got that error message. We were not expecting that particular one.
See, and you know what? All kidding aside here, the point that I was making earlier about doing this in phases is really important because I fired up my code that I had prior with just the hard-coded little samples and things like that, and it's failing there. So it's an immediate check to see, okay, well, where's the problem? Is it on her side or is it on my side? Is it the database code or is it the original code? And it is the original code. So I have a problem here with my code.
Well, I'm going to try. I'm just going to try something. I'm going to do a little of the when all else fails. Let's see if we can narrow down where the problem is. Which is a popular programming trick. So what I'm going to do is the answer was correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if a submitted answer equals answer, I'm just going to return
it's going to fail.
Correct. Does that work?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's failing when you hit submit. So it's actually not even hitting back into the server. Which is really weird.
Oh, so the post isn't.
The post isn't working.
All right.
Yeah, it's saying that it's
if I put the breakpoint, so if I put a breakpoint here, we're not seeing it go to this code.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to just to sort of demonstrate, because we did actually have a request earlier of could we show how the debugger works? So I'm just going to put a couple of breakpoints here so we can kind of see. This is what I would be doing to try and figure out what's going wrong with my code. I'd put a couple of breakpoints in you just click in the margins there and you create those little red dots in the margins. That creates a breakpoint, and that's a way of telling Visual Studio when you get to that line of code, stop so I can please look around. So if I run my code now.
Oh, okay.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
Just a second, let me go. And I go in and I launch my application. And this time I'm going to jump straight to the question because I know that's where my problem is. So I go to my question working. And you can see it doesn't bring up the website. Instead, right away, it brings me back to my code and you can see a little yellow arrow there. And that little yellow arrow is indicating this is the line of code that's about to be executed. So you can see that it's about to see if the request method is a get. And what I really think is cool is the way when you hover over things, you can even sort of get a preview of what the different values are, which is kind of cool. So now I can use these little buttons in the very top corner to step through my code. So step into sort of can execute one line of code at a time. So I can execute a line of code, and I can say, okay, so obviously the method was a get because now it's going to go get the title, and I execute that line of code. And again, it's neat if you hover over the variable. Oops, I'll have to do that in live preview. Then what's neat is when you hover over it, you see a little pop-up that tells you the value of that variable. So I can see as I'm stepping through my code that the value of question is currently, does this work? So I can see that working, and I know that line can executed successfully. And now I can see that the yellow arrow is on the return statement. So if I continue, it's going to bring back that template, and I'm going to see the page asking me the question.
Okay. Now, do me a favor. Go back to the page that's asking you the question. Don't close that. Just go back to your browser.
And I was on this one here. Nope, sorry. I've got too many windows open. Got to find the right one here. Dum-de-dum. I was on this one.
Okay. So you'll hold on one second. So you'll notice it says, does this work? Now, one of the very cool things about the way that our templates work is that we can actually make changes to the templates without having to recompile our code. So here's the problem. Go back to Visual Studio.
All right. So we've been going through the bugger. The blog is brought back with aha, I think I know what the problem is.
I know what the problem is.
Okay. And are you about to try and fix it?
Yes.
Okay. So now this is another neat feature of the debugger in Visual Studio, the fact that if you think you know what it is, you can fix it and keep going.
You can fix it in certain places.
Okay.
You can fix the template. Your Python code you're not going to be able to fix, but your templates you are. Now, what I want you to notice, and this actually goes all the way back to earlier this morning when we were talking about creating those forms and reading the values in, and we talked about keeping those values in sync. And I will always admit when a demo failed that I wasn't expecting, because there are times when I'm expecting a demo to fail.
Yeah, sometimes
tool.
Absolutely, we both do that.
So in this case, that's not what's happening here. This I was not expecting, but it's a perfect example of that trying to keep everything in sync. Now, one of the things that was happening is I was doing my demos sort of in chunks, that I went off and I did my form back and I did my code. So you'll notice there, request.form, submitted answer. So down right at the very bottom, the last line of code that you've got. Yeah. So you'll notice right there that it says submitted answer, request form, submitted answer. Do me a favor, go into templates.
All right, let's go to the templates.
And then go into answer question.
Into answer question. All right.
And now scroll down just a scotch. Perfect. And then you'll notice input type equals text.
Yep.
And then name equals, and it says answer. What was it expecting?
Something else, I'm guessing.
It was expecting submitted answer.
Submitted answer. Okay.
So what we can do is just update that. Submitted answer. Nope.
Was it
camel case that.
all lowercase?
Camel case.
Camel case. All right. So
lowercase. Lowercase s.
Lowercase s. Yeah, be specific. Thank you.
There
all
we
right,
go.
Good.
Camel case.
Okay.
And so now go ahead and save this.
All right. I can never remember which is camel case and which is Pascal case. So
hit save. And now go back to Internet Explorer.
All right. So this is a case where it's interesting. Remember, right, I'm still running the application this whole time. I've still been debugging. Mm-hmm. So this is a live change. As I said, one of the cooler things about Visual Studio is that sometimes you can do this. So, going back to my
all the way over.
Page.
Yep. And then now go ahead and type in whatever it is that you want.
Yes.
Perfect. And then now go ahead and click submit. And so you'll notice that it will now actually go back to the debugger. And one little thing, I'm actually going to kind of keep going here. One thing that I sometimes find is I'll go in and I'll set a couple of breakpoints, and then I'll realize, okay, wait a minute. You know what? I figured out what it is. I fixed it. Just go, engage, finish. So one of the cool things that you can do is you can actually just click continue.
Yep.
And it will just either go to the next breakpoint if you have one, or it will just run the rest of the code. So hit continue here for me.
And in this case, I expect that to run till it hits another breakpoint. Now, I do have another breakpoint back here, so is it?
Oh, okay. Then take away that breakpoint for me.
Well, it's okay to show it going through.
Okay. So there's our little breakpoint. So you'll notice that now it's actually going to read the answer correctly.
Yeah, and if I execute that line of code, it should go through and do that successfully.
Yep. So if you mouse over submitted answer.
Yep.
If it's still in.
It's still over in the world of HTTP. Yep.
Okay. No, and I'm still getting a bad request there. All right, maybe I don't know what the problem is.
It's going to be something along those lines.
Okay.
So if I put put a breakpoint here, and then I should be able to get it to continue. But yes, I'm still getting my bad request error back.
Then let's do this.
Let me finish talking to Redis, and what we will do is during the debugging and figure out what it is. But you can see where that debugger becomes really valuable as a tool as you step through your code and try to find things. And you also see that, yes, no matter how hard you try, it's very easy to mix up the names of your variables from your template and your forms when you're back and forth in the Python. So change a little bit, test it, change a little bit, test it, change a little bit, test it. The more you do that, the easier it's going to be to find your mistakes when you do make them. So we know it's not working yet. I'm just going to stop debugging and go back to the slides for a minute. So we were able to save and retrieve some values with Redis, and we were also getting rid of that B apostrophe by adding an extra parameter to our connection string. When we say decode responses equals true and charset equals UTF-8, that allows us to get rid of that B apostrophe that appears when we're storing the values. And I already demoed how to do that. So we do want to pick up some good habits early when we're working with Redis. I said we'll generally use a hierarchical naming convention for Redis keys, much like we did here, sort of question title, question, pair, game, high scores, top, user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, name. Those are sort of typical examples. You don't have to do this, but it's a convention that's useful to adopt, and it's fairly widely used. A couple of FAQ. I know the first time I was exposed to Redis, I was sort of like wondering, if I store a value in Redis and then I leave the website, will that value still be stored when I come back? Because when we were working with variables, if you declare a variable in your Python code, well, when you leave that website, that variable value is gone. Well, what's different about Redis is we were looking at how Redis is completely separate. We were able to access the values over here in our Redis store. So in this case, yes. If you go to a website, you store a value in Redis, and then you leave the website and turn off your computer and come back 3 days later, that value is still going to be stored there because it's a data store, and that is its job, is to store that data until you tell it to get rid of it. Now, it is possible if you want to delete the key. That's one of the reasons that's useful. There's another option as well. If you just take a quick glance down at the slide, there is an expire function you can use as well. So if you know you don't want the key to stick around for too long, you can actually call r.expire, tell it the key name and how many seconds you want it to stay alive. So it is possible to create, if you will, temporary storage. The next question, if I have all sorts of users visiting my website, are they sharing the same keys and values? And again, the value here is yes. Redis is a data store that's separate from Python. If Christopher runs this website, and he's connecting to my Redis data store, then when he tries to look up a value, he's looking at the same value that I stored. So we're sharing the same data when we use a data store. Yep. And again, that's a little bit different from when we're working with variables inside our Python.
Yep.
You can do a lot more with Redis than we covered here. This is, intro to Redis, enough to get you started, storing values, retrieving values. If you want more information, here's a couple of good websites that you can reference.
Yep. Okay. Let's give it one more shot here.
Got an idea?
Go back to Visual Studio.
All right. Christopher thinks he's got a shot at how to fix it. Do you want me to get rid of my breakpoints?
No. Scroll down for me real quick.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Go back to answer question.
Go to the answer
question HTML.
You want me to go to this particular template?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to go to the answer question HTML template. So that's in my templates directory. Answer question. Yep.
SUBMITTEDA. Okay.
Do you want me to just cut and paste that variable name and bring it over?
Sure. Right. I now know it's correct. What I actually want you to do is just run it again.
Okay.
So just, launch it one more time. And if it fails, then we'll go back and fix it.
I think it might just be a case of a live update wasn't enough?
If the live update just didn't work.
That's possible. Not everything lets you do live updates. Actually, I don't want to do a create. I want to go to a question.
Yep.
Let's go to question working. All right. Does this work? Hoping the correct answer is yes. We will find out. Submit. And the answer is correct.
There we go.
High fives.
All right.
Well done.
I want to do two real quick things here. First of all, I want to talk to the problem one more time, just because I want to make sure that we know what went wrong here.
Well, I can review that, and then do you want to cover, since I have the Visual Studio open here, it's probably easier for me.
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. So the problem we had was inside of our form. Answerquestion.html, we had created a text box, and the name of our text box was submitted answer.
Yep.
Though originally we had that name set to answer.
Correct.
And then in our Python code, when we went back to our Python code, we had said, hey, go to the form and request the contents of the variable submitted answer. And originally in the form that was called answer.
Exactly. So we had two different names there. One was answer.
So it was kind of like we had it like this.
Exactly.
So when Python said, hey, form, give me the value of answer, it said, never heard of it.
Yep.
When we change that and make it the correct value of submitted answer, it says, oh, I have a text box with that name. I'll give you the contents of that text box and put it into this variable.
That's exactly it.
And then the second piece of the puzzle.
Second thing, well, that was the problem.
That was what caused the error. Right?
Now that we actually have this working, I want to go back and do something here. So go ahead and hit play again for me.
Sure thing.
Just because I want to prove that our data is actually there. So do me a favor, go to WAC question.
Yeah.
WAC Canada, capital C.
Sure. Go to my
enter.
Canada question. Yep.
And you're going to notice there's Canada. So what's our national sport? Type in curling. I know it's wrong. Type
All
in
right, curling. I was going to go with hockey. You know, I am hockey geek girl, but okay.
And hit submit. And sure enough, you'll notice it tells us we're wrong, and you'll notice that it pulled the cross out of the database. So even though we shut down the app, opened it back up, shut down the app, opened it back up, Redis is a separate service. So all of those values are still there. So if you also went in, and I think you called the one that you created through the command line Redis?
Yes, I did. Oops. There we go.
And you'll notice, can you store a question here? You'll notice that, again, she created this through the command line. You can see that right there. So even though she created it from there, it's stored inside that database. Our app is now just another client over that database. So even though we kept shutting that thing down, opening it back up, shutting it down, opening it back up, all of the data is still there. The flowers are still standing. So what we now have is that front end to that database, and that database is a separate service.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So you can really see the separation of the database and the Python code. So it's a different concept, different thing to work with, but it adds a lot of power to your applications to be able to store things between users, across users, and cross launches.
Exactly. Moral of the story, make sure you have your names right.
Yeah.
So, Susan, besides having our names right, what did we learn?
Well, basically, we learned how to store and retrieve values in Redis, and how you can either overwrite existing values or append to existing values, delete, expire, and how to debug our code, as it turned out.
Yay!
What can we do this? We can do things like track number of visitors to a website, store high scores for a game, remember users' preferences, remember information about a user. Really, whatever you need to remember, you can store in there. It's pretty cool.
So I'm just going to laugh at our little mistake, turn a little red.
Going
That's what I
live.
do. Absolutely. See, we're really cooking here on this show. And, you know, again, you know, there's another brand new poll that's going to be thrown up there in a minute about the closed captioning. First time ever that we're doing that. Please answer. And then what do you say we take a break? We take everything that we've done here and make it available.
Right, because right now, you guys can't actually try our website. It's not possible.
Exactly. So we should allow the world to use our website. Let's foist it out there.
Yes.
Let's do
we're
it.
going to talk about how you deploy this so others can use the awesomeness of code that you create.
But first, 10 minutes.
All right. See you
We'll
soon.
see you guys soon.